Michael Steele sat in the green room, his hands clasped tightly together. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The television studio buzzed with activity around him. Producers shouted instructions, cameras rolled into way, place and makeup artists darted between guests to touch up their appearances. But Michael barely noticed any of it. His mind was racing, replaying the events that had led him here. For years, Michael had been a fixture in the world of politics and media. With his sharp suits, confident demeanor, and ability to speak eloquently on almost any topic, he had earned a reputation as someone who commanded respect. People listened when Michael Steele spoke. They trusted him, or at least they used to. Lately, though, cracks had begun to show in his carefully constructed image. Critics whispered about inconsistencies in his past, but nothing substantial enough to truly damage him had surfaced. Until now. Across the table from him sat Karoline Leavitt, an investigative journalist known for her relentless pursuit of the truth. She wasn't flashy or overly dramatic like some of her peers. Instead, she relied on facts and meticulous research to make her case. Her calm exterior masked a fierce determination that made even the most seasoned politicians uneasy. Today, she looked composed as ever, flipping through notes on her tablet while sipping water from a plastic bottle. Michael couldn't help but glance at her occasionally, trying to gauge what she might be planning. The two were scheduled to appear on a live debate show hosted by Lisa Carter, one of the most popular moderators in the country. The topic of discussion was supposed to be economic policy, a subject Michael felt comfortable discussing. He had spent weeks preparing talking points, rehearsing answers, and anticipating potential questions. What he hadn't prepared for was the possibility that Karoline might use this platform to expose something far more personal. As the minutes ticked away, Michael's anxiety grew. He tried to focus on deep breaths, reminding himself that he had faced tough crowds before. This was no different, he told himself. Just another day at the office. Yet something about the way Karoline kept glancing at him made his stomach churn. There was a glint in her eye, a quiet confidence that suggested she knew something he didn't. Finally, a production assistant knocked on the door and announced it was time to head out. Michael stood, smoothing his tie and forcing a smile onto his face. "Ready?" he asked Karoline, attempting to sound casual. She looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "Always," she replied simply before standing and following the assistant toward the stage. The bright lights of the set hit them as they walked onto the platform. The audience applauded politely, though there was an undercurrent of excitement in the air. Everyone knew this would be a heated discussion. Lisa Carter greeted them warmly, shaking hands and making small talk until the cameras began rolling. "Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's special edition of In Depth," Lisa began, addressing the camera with practiced ease. "We're joined by two prominent voices in today's political landscape, Michael Steele, former chairman of the Republican National Committee, and Karoline Leavitt, award-winning investigative journalist. Thank you both for being here." Michael nodded politely, offering a brief smile to the camera. Karoline did the same, though her gaze remained steady, focused. Something about her demeanor unnerved him further. Lisa launched into the first question, directing it to Michael. "Michael, let's start with you. In your opinion, what are the biggest challenges facing our economy right now?" Michael leaned forward slightly, adopting the authoritative posture he always used during interviews. "Well, Lisa, I think the biggest challenge is finding a balance between growth and sustainability. We need policies that encourage innovation without sacrificing long-term stability." He continued speaking, outlining his views in clear, concise language. For a moment, he almost forgot about the tension simmering beneath the surface. That is until Lisa turned to Karoline. "And what do you think, Karoline? Do you agree with Michael's assessment?" Karoline paused, tilting her head slightly as if considering his words. Then, without warning, she shifted gears entirely. "Actually, Lisa, there's something else I'd like to address tonight. Something that I believe is directly relevant to this conversation." Michael froze mid-sip of his water. His heart pounded in his chest as he watched her reach into her folder and pull out a stack of papers. She placed them on the desk in front of her, tapping the top sheet lightly for emphasis. I've spent the last several months investigating allegations regarding Mr. Steele's involvement in a data manipulation scandal during his tenure at a major think tank, she said evenly. These documents contain emails and internal communications suggesting that certain figures were altered to support specific policy recommendations that ultimately benefited powerful corporate interests. The room seemed to go silent. Even the hum of the studio lights felt distant now. Michael stared at her, his mouth dry, his mind scrambling to process what was happening. How had she gotten those emails? Why hadn't anyone warned him? Lisa blinked, clearly caught off guard but recovering quickly. Karoline, these are serious accusations. Can you elaborate on how you obtained this information? Of course, Karoline replied, her tone measured yet firm. I've been working with multiple sources within the organization, all of whom have corroborated the authenticity of these documents. And before we continue, I want to emphasize that this isn't just about one individual. It's about accountability and transparency in leadership. The audience murmured among themselves, some leaning forward in their seats to get a better look at the papers. Cameras zoomed in on Michael's face, capturing every flicker of emotion: shock, anger, fear. He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For once, the man who always had an answer was utterly speechless. Lisa turned back to him, her expression neutral but probing. Michael, do you have any response to these allegations? His mind raced. Deny it outright? Claim ignorance? Attack Karoline's credibility? None of the options felt safe. Instead, he stammered, I can assure you, these claims are baseless. I've dedicated my career to serving the public good, and I would never engage in such unethical behavior. But, even as he spoke, he could hear the lack of conviction in his own voice. The audience didn't miss it either. A few people exchanged skeptical looks, while others whispered to their neighbors. On social media, the story was already blowing up, with hashtags like the Steele exposed trending in real time. Karoline didn't let up. Baseless or not, the evidence speaks for itself. If you're innocent, then I encourage you to cooperate fully with an independent investigation. Transparency is key here. Michael clenched his fists under the table, fighting the urge to lash out. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was supposed to dominate the conversation, not be cornered like this. As the segment dragged on, he found himself growing increasingly agitated, struggling to maintain composure. By the time the show ended, he was sweating profusely, his tie loosened and his collar damp. Backstage, the atmosphere was tense. Reporters crowded around Karoline, eager to get her take on the explosive revelation. Meanwhile, Michael retreated to a private corner, avoiding eye contact with anyone who approached him. His phone buzzed incessantly with calls and messages, but he ignored them all. All he could think about was how quickly his world had unraveled, and how powerless he felt to stop it. Little did he know this was only the beginning. The ride back to his apartment felt like an eternity. Michael Steele sat in the back seat of the car, staring out the window as the city lights blurred past. His driver, a quiet man named Greg, kept glancing at him through the rearview mirror, but said nothing. The silence was deafening. Michael's mind raced with thoughts he couldn't quite untangle. Anger, fear, confusion, all swirling together in a chaotic mess. When he finally stepped inside his apartment, the first thing he did was pour himself a glass of whiskey. He didn't even bother with ice. He just downed it in one gulp, the burn barely registering. Then he poured another. Sitting on the edge of his couch, he replayed the events of the night over and over again. Karoline Leavitt's calm voice echoed in his head, her words cutting deeper each time he thought about them. These documents contain emails, suggesting that certain figures were altered. How had she found those emails? Who had leaked? Them? And why now? It wasn't as if this was recent history. It had happened years ago, buried under layers of bureaucracy and forgotten by everyone except apparently Karoline. Michael clenched his fists. She had planned this perfectly, ambushing him live on national television where he had no chance to prepare or defend himself. His phone buzzed incessantly on the coffee table, lighting up with notifications every few seconds. Reporters, colleagues, friends all wanting answers. He ignored it. The last thing he needed was more questions. Instead, he grabbed the remote and turned on the TV, flipping to one of the cable news channels. Predictably, the scandal dominated the coverage. Clips of the interview played on a loop, accompanied by talking heads dissecting every word, every reaction. One commentator called it the political bombshell of the year. Another described Michael as cornered and exposed. He turned off the TV, unable to stomach it anymore. But shutting it off didn't silence the noise in his head. What would happen next? Would there be investigations? Lawsuits? Would his career survive this? For the first time in years, Michael felt truly powerless. Meanwhile, Karoline Leavitt was stepping out of the studio into the cool night air. A small crowd of reporters waited for her outside, microphones thrust forward as they shouted questions. She held up a hand to signal she'd speak, and they fell silent, eager to hear what she had to say. "I stand by my reporting," she began, her voice steady and clear. "This isn't about attacking anyone personally. It's about holding people accountable when they abuse their positions of power. The public deserves transparency, and I'm committed to providing it." Her words earned applause from some in the crowd, though others muttered skeptically. Karoline didn't care. She had done her job, and she knew it. As she walked away, her colleague Rachel caught up with her, holding out a cup of coffee. "You've just made history," Rachel said with a grin. "How are you feeling?" Karoline shrugged, sipping the coffee. "Tired, relieved, ready for whatever comes next." "And what do you think will come next?" Rachel asked, raising an eyebrow. "A lot of backlash, probably," Karoline admitted. "But that's fine. If Michael Steele wants to fight back, let him. The truth is on my side." Rachel nodded approvingly. "Well, either way, you've got the whole team behind you. We'll handle whatever hits we take." Karoline smiled faintly, appreciating the support. Still, she knew this wasn't over. Exposing someone as prominent as Michael Steele wouldn't go unchallenged. He had resources, connections, and a reputation to protect. She fully expected him to try to discredit her in any way possible, but she also knew she had done everything by the book. Every document, every source, it was all legitimate. That gave her confidence. Back at Michael's apartment, the hours dragged on. Claire, his wife, arrived home late that night after attending a charity gala. She found him still sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the wall. His tie was loosened, his shirt wrinkled, and empty glasses littered the coffee table. "Michael," she said softly, setting her purse down. When he didn't respond, she walked over and sat beside him, placing a hand on his arm. "Are you okay?" He shook his head, his voice barely above a whisper. "I messed up, Claire, I really messed up." She frowned, concern etched across her face. "What are you talking about? What happened tonight?" So he told her. Everything. The emails, the accusations, Karoline's ambush, the media frenzy. It all came pouring out in a torrent of frustration and regret. Claire listened silently, her expression unreadable until he finished. "And now everyone knows," he concluded bitterly. "My career is over. Everything I worked for, it's gone." Claire sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Michael, I'm not going to lie to you. This is bad. Really bad. But it's not the end of the world. You can fix this. You have to." "How?" he snapped, his voice rising. "How do I fix something like this? Karoline has already painted me as some kind of villain. Everyone believes her." "Not everyone," Claire countered firmly. "And even if they do right now, that doesn't mean it has to stay that way. You need to get ahead of this. Issue a statement, explain your side of the story. Show people you're willing to cooperate with an investigation if it proves your innocence." Michael rubbed his temples, feeling a headache coming on. "It's not that simple, Claire. Even if I issue a statement, it won't matter. People have already made up their minds." "Then make them change their minds," she said sharply. "You're not some helpless victim here, Michael. You're smart, resourceful, and you know how to play the game. So start playing." Her words struck a nerve. Michael looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. She was right. He couldn't just sit here and wallow. If he wanted to salvage anything from this disaster, he needed to act. Fast. The next morning, Michael woke up early, his mind clearer than it had been in days. He showered, shaved, and dressed in a crisp suit, determined to present an image of strength and control. By the time he stepped into his office, his assistant Natalie was already waiting for him with a stack of messages and updates. "The phones haven't stopped ringing," she said nervously. "Everyone wants a comment, from reporters, politicians, even your old colleagues. What should I tell them?" "For now, tell them I'll release a formal statement later today," Michael replied, his tone firm. "In the meantime, I need you to pull together everything we have on Karoline Leavitt. Her background, her sources, her previous stories, anything that might give us leverage." Natalie hesitated. "Leverage? Are you sure that's a good idea?" "It's not about attacking her," Michael said quickly, though he wasn't entirely convinced of that himself. "It's about understanding her motives, knowing what we're dealing with." Natalie nodded reluctantly and got to work. Meanwhile, Michael retreated to his private office, where he spent hours drafting and redrafting his statement. Each version sounded weaker than the last, but he refused to give up. Finally, he settled on something concise and measured. I'm deeply troubled by the allegations brought forth last night. While I welcome scrutiny and accountability, I believe these claims are based on incomplete information and taken out of context. I am committed to cooperating fully with any investigation to ensure the truth comes to light. In the meantime, I ask for patience and fairness as we navigate this situation. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to do. He sent it off to his PR team for distribution, knowing it wouldn't stop the storm but hoping it might slow it down. By midday, the statement had been picked up by major news outlets, sparking a fresh wave playing. The days that followed Michael Steele's public statement felt like a blur. The media storm showed no signs of calming down. If anything, it grew worse. Reporters camped outside his office building, waiting for any glimpse of him. Social media buzzed with memes and hashtags mocking his carefully worded defense. Critics dissected every sentence of his statement, accusing him of dodging responsibility. Supporters were few and far between, their voices drowned out by the overwhelming tide of negativity. Michael tried to keep up appearances, attending meetings and making phone calls as if nothing had changed. But inside, he was unraveling. Sleep became a distant memory. He would lie awake at night staring at the ceiling, replaying Karoline Leavitt's calm, calculated delivery over and over again in his mind. Her words haunted him, gnawing at what little confidence he had left. These documents contain email, suggesting that certain figures were altered. He began skipping meals, his appetite gone. His wife Claire noticed the toll it was taking on him but didn't push too hard. She knew better than to confront him when he was like this, withdrawn, angry, and unpredictable. Instead, she quietly made sure he ate something, even if it was just toast or a bowl of soup. One evening, after another grueling day of damage control, Michael sat alone in his study, nursing a glass of whiskey. His phone buzzed on the desk, lighting up with yet another message. This time, though, it wasn't from a reporter or a colleague. It was from Ethan Blake, an old friend from college who now worked as a freelance programmer. Ethan had always been the kind of guy who could get things done, no matter how complicated or ethically questionable they might be. Michael hesitated before picking up the phone, knowing exactly why Ethan had reached out. "Hey man," Ethan said when Michael answered. His voice was casual, almost too casual. "I heard about your little situation." Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, it's not great." "I can imagine," Ethan replied, his tone shifting to something more serious. "Look, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I figured you might need some help. You still have enemies out there, right?" "What are you saying?" Michael asked cautiously. "I'm saying, maybe it's time to turn the tables. You want to take her down? I can dig into her stuff, emails, messages, whatever. Find something you can use against her." Michael froze, his grip tightening on the phone. The idea was tempting, dangerously so. If he could find something incriminating about Karoline, something that would discredit her or cast doubt on her motives, It might shift the narrative in his favor, but it was also risky, illegal even. And if anyone found out, no, Michael said firmly, shaking his head. That's not the answer. You sure? Ethan pressed. Because if you don't do something soon, she's going to bury you, trust me. I've seen this happen before. Michael ended the call without responding, but the seed had already been planted. Over the next few hours, he paced back and forth in his study, torn between his principles and his desperation. By the time morning came, exhaustion had clouded his judgment. He picked up the phone again and dialed Ethan's number. Karoline Leavitt, meanwhile, remained unfazed by the backlash. In fact, she seemed to thrive under the pressure. Every attempt to question her credibility only fueled her determination. She appeared on multiple talk shows, calmly defending her reporting and explaining the importance of holding powerful figures accountable. Her calm demeanor and unwavering focus earned her praise from colleagues and viewers alike. Behind the scenes, however, she wasn't entirely immune to the stress. Her inbox overflowed with hate mail and threats, forcing her to tighten her online security. Rachel, her producer, insisted she hire a bodyguard for protection, but Karoline refused. I'm not going to let fear stop me, she said firmly. If I do, then they win. Rachel respected her decision but kept a close eye on her nonetheless. They worked late nights together, reviewing documents, preparing for interviews, and strategizing their next moves. Despite the chaos, Karoline never wavered. She believed in what she was doing, and that belief gave her strength. Ethan wasted no time getting to work. Within days, he sent Michael a list of potential vulnerabilities in Karoline's digital footprint. Nothing concrete yet, he warned, but I'm close. Just give me a little more time. Michael nodded, though unease gnawed at him. He hated relying on someone like Ethan, but he convinced himself it was necessary. If Karoline thought she could destroy him without consequences, she was wrong. He needed to fight back any way he could. But fate had other plans. One afternoon, as Michael sat in his office reviewing a report, his assistant Natalie burst in, panic written all over her face. Mr. Steele, you need to see this, she stammered, holding out her tablet. On the screen was a breaking news alert. Attempted hack linked to Michael Steele's camp exposed. Below it was a screenshot of what appeared to be a chat log between Ethan and an unknown hacker, discussing ways to access Karoline's private accounts. The evidence was damning, and it led straight back to Michael. His blood ran cold. Where did this come from? He demanded, his voice barely above a whisper. It's everywhere, Natalie replied, her hands trembling. Social media, news sites, everyone's talking about it. Michael slumped into his chair, his mind racing. How had this happened? Had Ethan betrayed him, or had someone intercepted their communications? Either way, it didn't matter. The damage was done. Any shred of credibility he had left was gone. The fallout was swift and brutal. Calls poured in from reporters, demanding comment. His PR team scrambled to issue a denial, but it was too late. The story spread like wildfire, overshadowing even Karoline's original exposé. Critics called him hypocritical, pointing out the irony of accusing others of unethical behavior while allegedly engaging in illegal activities himself. Claire confronted him that evening, her expression a mix of anger and disappointment. What were you thinking? She demanded. Did you really think hacking into her accounts would solve anything? I wasn't thinking, Michael snapped, pacing the room. I wanted to make it stop. I wanted to fight back. Well, congratulations, Claire shot back. You've made it worse, 100 times worse. She was right, and he knew it. There was no coming back from this. No amount of spin or damage control could undo the harm he had caused. Not to his reputation, not to his marriage, not to himself. Karoline watched the developments unfold from her apartment, a small smile playing on her lips. She hadn't orchestrated the leak herself, but she wasn't surprised to see it surface. People like Michael always made mistakes when they panicked. Still, she felt a pang of sadness as she scrolled through the headlines. This wasn't about ruining lives. It was about accountability. She wished it hadn't come to this. As the week drew to a close, Michael faced another round of interviews. This time, he agreed to appear on Lisa Carter's show again, not because he thought he could salvage his image, but because he had nowhere else to go. The segment was scheduled for Monday night, and he knew it would be his last chance to speak directly to the public. When the day arrived, Michael walked onto the set with heavy steps. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by a hollow look in his eyes. Karoline was absent this time, leaving him alone to face the music. As Lisa introduced the topic, Michael braced himself for the worst. But instead of lashing out or denying responsibility, he surprised everyone, including himself. For the first time, he admitted his mistakes, not just the hacking attempt, but everything. The emails, the manipulation, the lies. He spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully but with genuine remorse. "I've spent my life building a career based on trust and integrity," he said, his voice trembling. "And somewhere along the way, I lost sight of those values. I'm sorry for the harm I've caused, for the people I've disappointed. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope someday I can earn it." The audience was silent, stunned by his candor. Even Lisa seemed taken aback. When the segment ended, Michael stood and walked off the stage feeling lighter than he had in weeks. It wasn't redemption, it wasn't even close, but it was a start. The morning after Michael Steele's emotional confession on national television, the world seemed to pause. For a man who had spent years crafting an image of strength and control, his breakdown was jarring. People didn't know how to react. Some were moved by his honesty, while others dismissed it as a calculated attempt to win back sympathy. Social media lit up with debates about whether he deserved forgiveness or condemnation. Michael woke up that day feeling like a stranger in his own life. The weight of his mistakes pressed down on him, but there was also a strange sense of relief. He had finally admitted the truth, not just to the public, but to himself. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but it was a step forward. Still, stepping out into the world felt impossible. Reporters were still camped outside his building, shouting questions every time he appeared. His phone buzzed constantly with messages from people he barely remembered knowing. Claire, his wife, tried to offer support, but their relationship was strained. She had stood by him through thick and thin, but this latest scandal pushed her patience to its limits. "You're going to have to rebuild trust," she told him one evening over dinner. "And not just with the public, with me too." Her words stung, but Michael knew she was right. He couldn't expect anyone to forgive him if he didn't prove he was serious about change. So he began taking small steps. He canceled all his speaking engagements and meetings, focusing instead on reflecting and planning. He reached out to old mentors asking for advice. He even started seeing a therapist, something he would never have considered before. Slowly, painfully, he began to confront the choices that had led him here. Karoline Leavitt, on the other hand, found herself thrust further into the spotlight. Her exposé on Michael had turned her into a household name, and the subsequent hacking scandal only solidified her reputation as a fearless journalist. Invitations poured in, from prestigious award ceremonies to high-profile interviews, but she remained focused on her work. She spent long hours at her desk, reviewing documents and preparing for upcoming stories. Though the Michael Steele case dominated headlines, she knew there were bigger issues to tackle. Corruption, inequality, corporate greed, these were the battles she wanted to fight. Yet despite her determination, she couldn't shake the unease growing inside her. One night after another late shift at the office, Karoline sat alone in her apartment scrolling through social media. Comments praising her bravery mixed with hateful messages accusing her of ruining lives. One comment caught her eye. "Do you ever think about the human cost of what you do?" It wasn't the first time someone had asked her that question, but this time it hit differently. She closed her laptop and stared out the window, lost in thought. Rachel, her producer, noticed the change in her demeanor during their next meeting. "You okay?" she asked gently. "You seem distracted." Karoline hesitated before responding. "I've been thinking about Michael," she admitted. "Not because I feel bad for him, but because I wonder if we're losing sight of something important." Accountability is crucial, but so is understanding why people make the choices they do. Maybe there's more to his story than we realize. Rachel raised an eyebrow. Are you saying you want to give him a platform to explain himself again? No, Karoline replied quickly. But maybe it's worth talking to him, off the record, just to understand where things went wrong. Rachel studied her for a moment before nodding. If that's what you think is best, go for it. But be careful. People like him can twist words faster than you'd expect. Karoline nodded, knowing Rachel was right. Still, the idea lingered in her mind. Understanding didn't mean excusing. It meant digging deeper, uncovering truths that went beyond surface-level scandals. And if she could learn something from Michael Steele's downfall, perhaps it could help prevent similar situations in the future. A week later, Karoline picked up her phone and dialed Michael's number. She hadn't planned the call. It was an impulse decision driven by curiosity and a desire to see beyond the headlines. When Michael answered, his voice was cautious, almost wary. "Karoline," he said, clearly surprised. "What do you want?" "I want to talk," she replied simply. "Not for an interview or anything like that, just a conversation. Can we meet somewhere?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Michael seemed to be weighing his options, unsure whether to trust her. Finally, he agreed. "Fine. Where?" They arranged to meet at a quiet cafe downtown, far from prying eyes and cameras. When Karoline arrived, Michael was already seated at a corner table nursing a cup of coffee. He looked smaller somehow, less imposing than the confident figure she'd faced on live TV. "Thanks for meeting me," Karoline said as she sat down across from him. "I know this might seem strange." "It does," Michael admitted, his tone guarded. "Why are you here, Karoline? Haven't you done enough?" She leaned back in her chair, choosing her words carefully. "This isn't about revenge or punishment, it's about understanding. I exposed your actions because I believe accountability matters. But now I'm wondering, why did you do it? What led you to make those decisions?" Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. For a moment, he considered brushing her off, telling her it was none of her business. But something in her voice, a genuine curiosity, free of judgment, made him hesitate. "I thought I was helping," he said finally, his voice low. At first it was small things, adjusting numbers slightly to make a policy look better. Nothing major, nothing that would really hurt anyone. But then it snowballed. Before I knew it, I was trapped. Admitting the truth would have destroyed everything I'd worked for. Karoline listened silently, letting him speak without interruption. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "It's easy to justify things when you think you're doing the right thing," she said. "But at some point, you have to ask yourself, who am I really serving? Myself or the people who depend on me to be honest?" Michael looked away, unable to meet her gaze. "I let them down," he murmured. "Everyone. My family, my colleagues, the public. I don't know if I can ever make that right." "You won't know unless you try," Karoline replied. "Accountability isn't just about punishment, it's about learning, growing, and making better choices moving forward." Her words stayed with him long after their meeting ended. As he walked home that evening, Michael realized something important. He couldn't undo the past, but he could shape the future. It wouldn't be easy, and it wouldn't happen overnight. But for the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. The days that followed were quieter, both for Michael and Karoline. The media frenzy began to die down, replaced by new scandals and controversies. Life moved on, as it always did. But the impact of their encounter lingered. For Michael, it marked the beginning of a long journey toward redemption. He started volunteering with local organizations, using his skills to mentor young professionals and advocate for ethical leadership. He wrote essays reflecting on his mistakes, sharing lessons he hoped others could learn from. It was slow progress, but each step brought him closer to reclaiming a piece of himself. For Karoline, the meeting reinforced her belief in the power of journalism, not just to expose wrongdoing, but to spark meaningful conversations. She continued her investigative work, tackling tough subjects with the same passion and dedication that had defined her career. But she also made a conscious effort to listen, to seek understanding alongside accountability. Though their paths diverged, the connection they forged that day in the cafe remained. They weren't friends, and likely never would be. But they shared a mutual respect for each other and for the difficult truths they had uncovered together. Months passed and the world moved on. The headlines that once screamed Michael Steele's name faded into quieter corners of the internet. New scandals took center stage, and people turned their attention to fresh controversies. But for Michael, the quiet was a gift. It gave him time to think, to reflect, and to rebuild, not just his reputation but himself. He spent most days working behind the scenes, away from cameras and microphones. Instead of speaking at conferences or appearing on talk shows, he focused on mentoring young professionals. He joined a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting ethical leadership, where he shared his story openly, admitting his mistakes and urging others to learn from them. At first it was awkward. Some attendees were skeptical, whispering about his past as soon as he left the room. But over time they began to see him differently, not as a disgraced figure, but as someone willing to face his failures head-on. Claire noticed the change in him too. Their relationship had been strained after the scandal, but Michael's efforts to make amends helped bridge the gap between them. He started small, helping around the house more, listening when she spoke, and being present instead of distracted. One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching an old movie, Claire reached for his hand. "I'm proud of you," she said softly. "Not because you're perfect, but because you're trying." Her words meant everything to him. For so long he had defined himself by success, by how others perceived him. Now he realized that true strength came from vulnerability, the courage to admit when you were wrong and to keep moving forward anyway. Karoline Leavitt continued her work with the same intensity that had made her famous. Her exposé on Michael Steele earned her numerous accolades, including a prestigious journalism award. She accepted the honor humbly, using her acceptance speech to remind everyone of the importance of accountability. "Truth is messy," she said. "It's uncomfortable and sometimes it hurts. But without it we can't grow, we can't improve, and we can't hold ourselves or each other to a higher standard." Despite her success, Karoline felt restless. The Michael Steele case had consumed her life for months, and while it taught her valuable lessons, it also left her questioning her own motivations. Was she doing this work purely to expose wrongdoing, or was there something deeper driving her? Late nights at the office became moments of introspection. She thought about the human cost of her investigations, not just for those exposed, but for herself. How much of her identity was tied to chasing the next big story? Rachel noticed the shift in her friend. "You've been quiet lately," she remarked one afternoon as they reviewed notes for an upcoming piece. "Everything okay?" "I'm fine," Karoline replied, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Just thinking." "About what?" Rachel pressed. "About whether I'm doing enough," Karoline admitted. "Exposing corruption is important, but sometimes it feels like we're treating symptoms instead of curing the disease." "What happens after the headlines fade? Does anything really change?" Rachel nodded thoughtfully. "That's a tough question. Maybe the answer isn't black and white. Maybe your job is to shine a light and then let others pick up the pieces." It wasn't a satisfying answer, but it resonated with Karoline. She decided to take a short break from investigative reporting, focusing instead on writing essays and giving lectures about the role of journalism in society. These projects allowed her to explore bigger questions, like how communities could heal after scandals and how individuals could foster transparency in their own lives. One crisp, autumn morning, Michael received an unexpected email. It was from Karoline, inviting him to speak at a panel discussion she was moderating on ethics in leadership. The subject line read simply, "A new chapter." Michael stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure how to respond. He hadn't spoken publicly since his appearance on Lisa Carter's show, and the idea of sharing a stage with Karoline felt surreal. Claire encouraged him to accept. "It's a chance to show people you've changed," she said. "Besides, maybe it'll give you some closure." After weighing the pros and cons, Michael sent a reply. "Thank you for the invitation. I'd be honored to participate." The event took place at a university auditorium, filled with students, professors, and community members eager to hear from both speakers. When Michael stepped onto the stage, the audience greeted him with polite applause. Karoline introduced him warmly, acknowledging his journey and expressing gratitude for his willingness to share his experiences. Throughout the discussion, Michael spoke candidly about his past mistakes and the lessons he had learned. He didn't shy away from difficult questions even when they made him uncomfortable. At one point, a student asked, "Do you think you deserve forgiveness?" Michael paused, considering the question carefully. "Forgiveness isn't something I expect," he said finally. "It's something I hope to earn through my actions. I know I hurt people, and I'll spend the rest of my life working to make things right." Karoline added her perspective, emphasizing the importance of accountability and growth. "Mistakes are part of being human," she said. "What matters is how we respond to them. Do we hide from the truth or do we confront it? Do we blame others or do we take responsibility? Those choices define us." The audience listened intently, many nodding in agreement. By the end of the session, several attendees approached Michael and Karoline to thank them for their honesty and insight. For the first time in years, Michael felt a sense of purpose, a belief that his experiences, however painful, could help others avoid similar pitfalls. As the weeks turned into months, Michael and Karoline crossed paths occasionally, at industry events, charity fundraisers, and panel discussions. They weren't close friends and likely never would be, but they shared a mutual respect forged through adversity. Each had grown in ways they hadn't anticipated, learning not just about the world around them, but about themselves. For Michael, the journey was far from over. He knew he would always carry the weight of his past, but he no longer saw it as a burden. Instead, it was a reminder of how far he had come and how much further he still wanted to go. For Karoline, the experience reinforced her belief in the power of storytelling. Journalism wasn't just about uncovering secrets, it was about creating space for reflection and dialogue. Through her work, she hoped to inspire others to seek truth even when it was hard. Though their lives diverged, the connection they formed remained. In a world often divided by conflict and mistrust, they proved that understanding was possible, even between unlikely allies. And perhaps, in their own small way, they showed that redemption wasn't just a destination, but a process, one step at a time.